Hey guys, how are you doing? Okay, let's talk about the second and third sentences that you had from your first assignment. The first sentence that I want to talk about now is Mark was reading about the tragic news in Detroit. So this was your second sentence. And the first word you're going to want to characterize as being what? A noun, because Mark can fit into the position that a noun fits into with our replacement tests. So remember that if you can fit into the subject position, when you have a sentence like blank might be interesting, then you know that that thing that can fit there must be a noun. So you could say Mark might be interesting, therefore you know that Mark has to be a noun. And then we have was reading. Notice we have a sequence of two verbs. So it's really important that when you have a sequence of two or more verbs, the last verb in that sequence is the main verb. The very last verb can only be the main verb. There's only one main verb per sentence. So all of the verbs that precede the main verb have to be auxiliary verbs. So you want to label them as auxiliaries. They don't have the same syntactic structure or the same semantic function as main verbs. So that's why we have two different categories of verb. And so it's important to identify and always just remember that when you have a sequence of verbs, the very last one in English will always be your main verb. Anything preceding it has to be an auxiliary verb. So then we have about the tragic news in Detroit. So looking at about, how do we know that this is a preposition? Remember that prepositions give us information about spatial relations, about relationships among different entities in the sentence, about location, about time, about manner of motion. So all of these semantic concepts are captured with prepositions. And so we have Mark was reading about the tragic news in Detroit. Notice that prepositions cannot undergo any of those processes that we said nouns can undergo or verbs can undergo. So you can't form the plural of about, you can't say abouts, you can't form the progressive with about, you can't say abouting. So this guy for sure we would know as a preposition. And then we have the again, our famous word the, right, which is the most common word in English. It's found everywhere. So if you just start listening around you to people speaking and you keep track of how often you hear this word, it is extremely common. So this is the definite determiner, the, and you would know that because you can say he wrote the other books. So it fits into that position. And then tragic here is giving you information about what? About the news. And tragic therefore must be, whoops, that's kind of tragic. Okay. We're gonna try to straighten this out. I hope that you guys can still see clear. Okay, so tragic is modifying news. And what is news? Well, it's ending in S, so we might wonder whether it's a plural form. But notice how you use this word. The news is good. The news is good. That's a plural form of the verb is. So news, although it ends in S, is doing so just because it happens to be a word that ends in S. And it doesn't have a plural. So you can't say newses. And it doesn't have a singular form, new, a new, meaning some piece of news, something like that. So we know that news is a noun. How? Not because of pluralization, because it's, you could think, an inherent plural, but because it fits into the position where we know nouns can go, news might be interesting. So always just think about that example as being, okay, if it's a noun, it's going to fit into that position, blank might be interesting. So given that news is a noun, we know that tragic is telling us about news. Tragic must be, therefore, an adjective. And then we have at the end of the sentence, in Detroit. What is the information that's being conveyed is location. So we're thinking already, aha, preposition. And of course we have the preposition in here. So the prepositions of English are in, on, around, about, onto, under, with, and there are a bunch more, but you can see all of them in the text when they talk about prepositions. They give you the listing of all of the prepositions of English. They are invariant. They can't take different forms. They can't show up with a plural or a past tense marker or anything like that. And then appearing after in, we have Detroit, which we know is a nominal because Detroit might be interesting. We can do that test. So let's look at our last example. The guests were arrested for disorderly conduct. Again, our favorite word of English, the. So this guy is going to be determiner. And then you have guests. Notice this is in the plural form. So already it's telling you I'm a noun. If you have something that is in the plural form, remember that doesn't mean anything ending in S. So you have to think to yourself, okay, if I get rid of this S, do I have a singular form? Yes, I do. One guest. If I add the S in, do I have the plural? Yes, because two guests. So in other words, this guy is a nominal. You could also do the test to see the position in the sentence. So you could say guests might be interesting. Okay, so then you have were arrested for disorderly conduct. So you have this sequence again of verbs, were arrested. You know that were and arrested has to end in a main verb. So you know that arrested is the last verb in the group. It has to be the main verb. Were, because it's occurring before the main verb, has to be an auxiliary verb. So this guy is going to be labeled as an auxiliary verb. And then we have for disorderly conduct, and for, of course, is one of our prepositions. It's relating two concepts in the sentence, and it is invariant. It doesn't show up with any marker on the end of it, so we know that this is a preposition. Now, the next word was a little bit tricky, disorderly, because based on its form, it looks like an adverb. In other words, it ends in ly. And we said that we have a lot of adverbs in English that end in ly. So you may have looked at this initially and thought to yourself, okay, this is a word ending in ly, it must be an adverb. However, you would then think to yourself, well, what is this word doing in this sentence? So it's not enough to just look at the form of the word, but you have to think about what is the meaning that it plays in that sentence. So in this sentence, when you have disorderly conduct, disorderly is giving you information about conduct. It's modifying the type of conduct that we're talking about. And we know that conduct is a noun. How do we know that? Because you could say something like conduct might be interesting. It's kind of a weird sentence to say, but it's a possible sentence to say. So disorderly is telling you about the type of conduct, therefore it must be an adjective. In other words, the idea is that while it is true that in English we have a lot of adverbs that end in ly, we also have other words that end in ly that are not adjectives, sorry, that are not adverbs, okay? So for example, if you say the manly teacher walked into the room, the manly teacher, you would look at manly first and think, okay, it's ly, so maybe it's an adverb, but then you'd think, what role is it playing in this sentence, the manly teacher? Manly is modifying teacher, teacher you know is a noun, so manly here is functioning as an adjective, even though it has the ly. So the idea is that if something ends in ly, it might be an adverb, but you have to look at its function in the sentence. And of course, you can also have adverbs that don't end in ly, because if you say he runs fast, then you have something that's functioning to modify the running, and yet there's no ly. So you don't say he runs fastly, something like that. Okay, so in a minute we'll come back and we will go over the assignment number 2 for syntactic categories. Thanks, guys.